I hope you're well. In this one, I'm making a Traxor launch pad, a guide rail runway, if you like, that'll help you get the most out of a shorter track, though users with longer rails might find it useful too. This little project came out of a conversation over on the 10-Minute Workshop Plus forums from Plus member Sarah. Sarah has an entry-level Traxor with a 700mm guide rail that she uses with a DIY NFT like this one that she made from My Plans. Sarah also uses the Dave Stanton dog locks to keep the rail in line and was looking for a way to increase the crosscut capacity. You're limited to around 550mm when you use two tall bench dogs to keep everything together. And Sarah wanted to make the most of the crosscut as well as providing support for the saw so that you can plunge fully before starting the cut in the workpiece. Now I figured that the front rail support from my DIY rail hinge could probably be adapted for this, but having made it, I've realised it can actually be a lot simpler. And make no mistake, the DIY rail hinge and rail hinge plans tick a lot of boxes, and a great value, by the way, available in the store now or directly below this video. But if you just need the occasional crosscut that's wider front to back than 550mm, and back when I was a fitted furniture guy, most of my wardrobes were only 550mm deep. If you just need to make those cuts occasionally, then this is a really simple solution that's quick, cheap, and easy to make. I'm making this out of offcuts of 12mm half-inch plywood, but you could just as easily use MDF, and the exact dimensions are really up to you. I want the guide rail to be fully supported, so I'm cutting a strip that's slightly narrower than the rail, just using packers to offset it by 3mm. And then I'll cross cut that again at about the rail width for the saw platform or shelf. This size works well for the Festool saw, but it was a little short for the entry-level saw, the McAllister, that I'm using. You really want the platform to be long enough for the rearmost adjuster cam to be on board. You'll see why later. The longer piece is the riser, and you only need this to be as long as the height of your bench plus the thickest material you're likely to cut. And in my case, that's about 250mm, 10 inches or so. And I'll also cut a couple of triangles to use later as bracing. With the riser flush against the edge of the rail, I can mark the centre of the down-facing T-slot and drill an 8mm hole in the edge of the riser. This will take an 8mm dowel that locates the rail. 8mm is a little loose for most rails, but a couple of turns of tape will fix that. We want the platform to be nice and square to the riser, so I have it clamped onto the bench, and then it can just be glued and screwed together. Then I'm adding the bracing supports to the underside, just glued and clamped in place while the glue sets. Now, I said earlier on that this could also help Traxor users with longer guide rails. Let's say you're a Festool TS55 user and you've just got the one 1400mm guide rail, for example. You've got the kind of same problem really, because even though your rail is long enough to span the bench, it's unsupported when it's off the bench, and this little platform just lets you add that extra little bit of support. We can set up our rail against the dog so that it's nice and square, and we can fit the dowel into the T-slot under the rail so we know that it locates in the right place, and then we can just clamp the riser onto the front of the bench, maybe checking it for square. We can remove the front bench dog and dog lock to give us the extra crosscut capacity, and because the rail's located on the dowel, we know that it's going to stay square. If you're using the shorter rail, we do the same thing, but make sure it overhangs the front of the bench. With the Dave Stanton dog locks, you get about 20 millimeters, 3/4 of an inch or thereabouts. Now we need to raise the platform to allow for the thickness of the rail, and all rails vary a little bit. Between 4 and 6 millimeters is fairly typical, and just use whatever you have to bring that up flush with the rail. This McAllister is closer to 6 millimeters thick, so I'm using an offcut of 6 millimeter MDF, and it's just held in place with double-sided tape. The final piece of the puzzle is to continue this central rib that the saw runs on onto the platform. These ribs are usually about 16 millimeters wide, and I've cut this one from an offcut of 6 millimeter ply using the Strawbite waist side jigs. If you're a Traxor user and you don't have a set of these, then get them now. Links in the description as always. You can fine tune the fit with a bit of sanding if you need to, and then you can stick this down, making sure it aligns with and continues that rib along the platform. Again, I'm just using double-sided tape for this. And that's kind of all there is to it. The position of the launch pad isn't going to change laterally along the bench unless you're using a different guide rail, and you know it's square to the column of holes because that's how you set it up. You could add a little strip of something onto the front of the bench to make sure that it rises nice and straight and square for different thicknesses of material. You could, if you wanted to, put a slot in the riser, as I have on the rail hinge front support, so you don't have to clamp it on every time. There's provision in the DIY MFT design for T-Track on the front of the bench for that. I just haven't fitted them yet. Or you could just drill a bolt straight through the front of the apron and take this off when you don't need it, or maybe just flip it around so that it's not in the way. But at its simplest, as it is, this works really well. It extends the crosscut to about 640 millimeters. It locates the saw accurately, and it lets you plunge to the full depth of cut before getting to the workpiece in a controlled and secure way. Now, I might get a set of plans together for this if anyone's interested. I am shooting this on Wednesday and it's due out on the Friday, so it probably won't be out at launch. But honestly, I'd rather you spent that money by joining us as a paid subscriber to 10 Minute Workshop Plus, where you can get those plans for free. There's more details at 10minuteworkshop.com, or you can sign up directly at 10minuteworkshop.plus. We'd love to have you on board and taking part, and like Sarah did, helping to shape the future videos on the channel like this one. So there you go anyway, something for everyone in this little build. I'll call this one done for today. Thanks so much for taking a look, and I'll see you all again very soon. All right, take care.